I do open source, and I'm probably Sweden's loudest Elixir developer. And today we'll be focused on the embedded side of what I do, and we will be talking about hardware security. So let's see where that takes us. So a common song in security is that physical access to a device means it is game over. You're screwed. It's not a particularly inspiring song to me, and I think today it's largely incorrect. Or, put it differently, skill issue. We can definitely do better than just giving up. So this is keeping secrets in your opponent's hands. Now, this tiny device is an attempt at a solution. It is somewhat a solution to multiple problems, and it is far from perfect. The problems are kind of gnarly, and some would say they're mathematically absolute. They'd be considered binary in correctness. It's either right or wrong, secure or broken. Computers used to forget things. Storage was the limitation. Remembering was the hard part. And our information used to be lost and forgotten. So we painstakingly put it on the internet, and then we built up the servers to ensure nothing was ever lost or forgotten. Our information is now never lost or forgotten, so we painstakingly remove it from the internet to ensure that it might someday be gone. Or we invent methods to make sure the information is never put there in the first place. It's encrypted, it's not readable, it's protected. So I taught this device to forget things. In fairness, it was designed to do that, but the producer of the chip is also a producer of NDAs. They try to make sure that the data sheet remains lost and forgotten. But I live on the internet, and things and people, they do get lost there all the time, but they are very rarely truly forgotten. There were enough scraps that I could figure it out. So I'll try and show you. And you might have heard the old wisdom, have you tried turning it off and on again? So I have a small device here. It's just a Raspberry Pi. Let me see. Oh, you can't. I need to shift this over here so you can see it. That might help. So I'll just load up the demo example. So I plug this in here. Probably put it the right way on. Yes, lit up and everything. So we'll just connect to it. We'll check the state of things. Yeah, that seems to be working. And the idea with have you tried turning it off and on again is that you restore a device to a known good state. But what if your device goes to a known bad state? That's kind of what your phone does when you have to log in if you restart it. So right now, this little chip will not sign a digest. This is an error code. It will not verify a message authentication code. But if we pass it a particular password, it will now sign a digest and verify message authentication codes, actually several of them. But if I replug it, and start over, just see that it fails again. So that is a useful feature, believe it or not. Where did my pointer go? There it is. So making it do this was harder than it needed to be. This is often the case with security, especially with hardware. It's like the vendors do not want you to succeed at using their products. They only care about massive scale and barely that. It's like they've done their part, they made the hardware, they've almost made documentation, they're done. Now, this is a cheap security chip, and if you know security, you know that security doesn't come cheap and it doesn't come on a chip. We say that security is a process. This is also true in hardware, but it's also quite different, because in hardware we need to get more things right from the start, and that is definitely quite the process. But the chip, it has what's called security features. You might also know that security doesn't come in the form of features. You don't add things to make things more secure. Typically, you strip things away. Security tends to come in the form of limitations, layer, structure, order, constrain the entropy, control things, usually in the form of terrible inconvenience, but it's for your own good. It's eat your greens, do your exercises, floss and brush, use two-factor, multi-factor. But the chip does enable us to do some things we previously couldn't. So I suppose we might say it has capabilities. And the really interesting capabilities of this chip are a bag of cryptographic algorithms implemented in hardware. So we have ECC, we have AES, we have SHA, we have elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman. And if you want to know how these things work, you should have seen Eli's talk. She went through the math. These are really good things to have. It also brings hardware-secured storage, which is really hard to extract information from. It also offers some volatile storage, which will lose data when it's powered off. Both of these serve important functions, and most importantly, they combine in interesting ways, and you can configure this chip in interesting ways, combined with that bag of cryptographic algorithms. So that's what makes this like a security device. The password we gave the chip in this demo is, if you know your encryption, a secret key for symmetric encryption. Symmetric encryption is great because it is a very efficient way of encrypting and decrypting data, whether large amounts or smaller pieces. And in the case of this chip, we're using AES. Symmetric encryption is kind of terrible because it is incredibly difficult to keep the secret key safe while you use it. It's also surprisingly difficult to protect the key even when storing it. And of course, you could lock it away in some kind of encrypted vault, which in turn requires a key. However you lock the box, whatever shape you make the key way, if it's text, eyes, voice, it's still a secret key. And the problem remains. Our chip can actually keep a secret key fairly secret with a lot of asterisks. But then we have asymmetric encryption, or you might know it as public key cryptography. And it's a remarkable invention. It's a bunch of math, and it has a cool sibling called the Diffie-Hellman, which both of them allow us to make things secure without sharing a symmetric key up front to encrypt our communication. Now, asymmetric cryptography is great because it lets you share a public key, and anyone with a public key can send you encrypted messages that you can encrypt or decrypt with your private key. But asymmetric cryptography is kind of terrible because it can't really encrypt very much data very efficiently. So it's slow, it's impractical, and it is best reserved for tiny pieces of data. In the case of our chip, it provides ECC, or elliptic curve cryptography, using the P256 curve, if you care about that. But the worst part of asymmetric encryption is clearly that there is no practical, sane, physical analog to compare it to. It's all math and computer stuff. It's very hard to describe or explain to a layman in terms of pigs and bunnies. Like, you get this metaphor, which is someone throwing open locks at people and saying, I have the key, just lock something and send it to me. It's not a terribly good metaphor, but it's also something that is not feasible without computers. The way asymmetric cryptography works is kind of cool in that way, but it's also very annoying to explain. You can also encrypt something with the private key for decryption by the public key, but we don't call that encryption because it is semantically a bad idea. It's insecure, the public key is public, so why would you protect something using it? Another important security primitive is the cryptographic hash. A hash, also called the digest, is a piece of data that represents another piece of data, much like a fingerprint, a unique enough representation of a person. It is not the person. You can reference the person using a fingerprint, but you can't talk to the person because you have the fingerprint. It's a one-way algorithm producing a handful of bytes from any amount of data and importantly, it can't be reversed. Because it's used for a variety of purposes, hashing comes in a lot of different flavors. We won't cover them here, but our chip offers SHA-256. Now, combinations of these primitives is what we actually use. Occasionally, it's called hybrid cryptography, but it's actually any applied cryptography typically needs multiple things. So I mentioned that encrypting with the asymmetric private key for decryption by the public key is not considered encryption and decryption. The operations are typically called sign and verify. And it's a very powerful tool for ensuring that a message or some piece of data comes from the right party. It can provide authenticity, but never secrecy. So you take the message, you hash the message, you encrypt the hash, this is your signature, and you send the message with the signature to the recipient. They can decrypt the signature, get the hash, they take the message, perform the hash on that. If the hash is matched, they know the party with the private key endorsed this message or signed the message. The hashing primarily makes the process more efficient, especially with the poor performance of asymmetric cryptography. It turns a large amount of data into a single small hash, which is exactly what's needed. So now we've covered some ground. Who here knows about TLS? Okay, good. Who knows about HTTPS? I think it's more. So HTTP, secured by TLS, is called HTTPS. You might know this. TLS uses classic asymmetric cryptography with signatures for verifying that you're speaking to the right server when you're making a request. So we have a store of trusted certificate authorities, a list of who your browser vendor trusts. Now, in that list, you'll find odd choices, maybe. There's a company called GoDaddy. There. Who here has ever bought an SSL cert from GoDaddy, actually? Yeah, we had to do that once upon a time. Sounds very trustworthy. The cert is only used to authenticate and to prevent man-in-the-middle attacks, and then we perform the Diffie-Hellman key exchange, agree on a key by only exchanging public harmless parts, and then that shared key is used for symmetric encryption, so we get something performant. It's fairly elegant. Now, if you're interested in something that might stretch your brain a bit, look up double ratchet encryption. It's an advanced use of cryptographic primitives developed by Signal, so the messaging app, and it powers their end-to-end encryption. It's been adopted by WhatsApp, Messenger, iMessage, but not notably Telegram. Don't use Telegram for secret things. I'm frequently tempted to try and implement a basic version of double ratchet using only the security chip, but I ask that people stop me because I have a family, and it's not going to be good for my health. Now, currently the development of crypto techniques seems to be focused on the threat of quantum computing. And if you saw Eli's talk earlier, they covered that pretty well. So I'm not going to talk too much about that. We're moving on. We're using fairly traditional encryption here. Now, with typical client-server software, you have a component that is considered secure, the server. It's a massively trusted execution environment in the typical case, a black box in which you can run cryptographic operations to your heart's content safely. The client cannot touch your memory. You can be confident that it would be hard to even find the exact right server, never mind someone putting it under an oscilloscope and sort of sticking probes into it. It's a very separate environment. We don't have it that easy in the embedded space. Another common verse is that the S in IoT stands for security. Who's heard that before? You may note that there is no S in IoT, so it's very, very clever. I think the snark is well-deserved due to a lot of poorly secured IoT devices throughout the years. But good security practices, they do exist. They are in use here and there. But whether they're gaining ground faster than the market is expanding is anyone's guess. But we do have the technology to do better, so we try, some of us. Now, there are many degrees of securing hardware. So most hardware can support this one. Signed firmware from a locked bootloader. So we store a certificate that is locked into hardware with a fuse or a one-time programmable storage bit. And we lock the bootloader to require that the bootloader and the first running part of the system are signed with a particular private key. The private key is notably not on the device. So this prevents malware from persisting. It also ensures that the device runs the intended firmware and software, which is a prerequisite for a lot of other cryptographic techniques. So this is the start of what we call a chain of trust in terms of authenticity and trusted code. I've seen this called verified boot, hardware assured boot, secure boot, and probably a few others. This is not a very cohesive industry. But the mechanism can also very easily turn your devices into short-lived e-waste. If your security requirements are high, you might have to sort of lock everything down. For consumer devices, you might be able to keep a path open to repurposing the device in spite of this code signing mechanism. Just consider it carefully. It's like e-waste is a really sad topic. Another common step is to add a hardware chip like the one I showed, which allows storing a private key inside of it. And the private key becomes part of the device's identity, and you use it to establish things like MTLS connections. And MTLS, or mutual TLS, is a modified usage of TLS. So there was a point to me explaining TLS, I promise. But both parties have certificates instead of holding a CA list. It's a very similar mechanism, but slightly different. And this is a very good way of securing firmware updates, cloud connectivity, and more. It saves you from storing an API key in the device, which inevitably leaks and then you have trouble. So we have a chain of trust from the device, from the device's SoC to the running firmware, and we have a separate chain of trust from that security chip and to the cloud services. But these are two separate chains. So you could grab either the device or the security chip and do stuff. You can't trust that the chain is unbroken. Fun stuff can happen in between, and you should avoid that. It's a good start, but it's far from complete. The next step is typically to encrypt disks. Now, this can be done for IP protection, like intellectual property IP, or to prevent analysis. But most of the time, hopefully, you're doing it on the data to protect your users' data. You can also do it for all of the above reasons. But this requires a secret key, and this is where the troubles start. Protecting a secret key is difficult because of how symmetric encryption works, and it is easy to accidentally expose a key in hardware or software. A lot of cases have been like the key is just on the drive and you can just extract it and unlock the drive. And that kind of protects against some cases, I suppose. But this is a genuinely hard problem, and some very wealthy companies have done a lot of work to address it. So who has heard of Apple Secure Enclave? Yeah, a few. Okay. It's good branding. It's a hardware security device that they've included for years now in their products, and now it's baked into Apple Silicon. And if you want to learn about it in great detail, you should watch the Black Hat presentation in this QR code, Demystifying the Secure Enclave Processor. It's a little bit old, but you get the idea. Importantly, this thing can contain and protect secrets. It can perform cryptographic operations using the things stored inside of it. And this makes it appropriate as a root of trust. It runs a tiny separate OS in an encrypted region, but in main memory. So it gets more memory than this thing does. And it powers stuff like Touch ID, Face ID, and so on. And this, I think, is probably the most publicly promoted implementation of what I'd say are the best practices in embedded hardware security. Now, we have something quite similar for modern ARM devices, because the Secure Enclave is all proprietary stuff, but it's very, very similar to a thing called ARM TrustZone. Who's heard of ARM TrustZone before? A few long-suffering people have heard of it. Okay. So it's an isolation scheme in the processor itself, allowing you to run a separate OS called the Trusted Execution Environment, or a T. And it has special access to specific hardware peripherals, such as cryptographic accelerators, secure storage, volatile storage. And this means you can actually safely store encryption keys within your processor. So these are a bunch of devices that should have ARM TrustZone. Whether they have well-documented implementations of ARM TrustZone is a different matter entirely. But you should be able to safely store encryption keys within your processor. Exclude those two on the side. We're still going to have a conversation about those. But manufacturers can include hardware that makes it incredibly hard to extract keys from the device. And those keys can be a root of trust for symmetric encryption. And if you have well-protected secrets for symmetric encryption, you can encrypt memory, and you can derive more keys, and you can protect private keys, and so on. This is a base for a root of trust. And essentially, you then hook this up so that whenever you call into OpenSSL or a kernel crypto things, it can delegate to your TrustZone implementation or integrate with your TrustZone implementation. So the keys would rarely, if ever, leave the trusted, secure environment. And even the decrypted contents only travel inside a main memories instead of, like here, crossing these wires. That is an I2C bus that's running at ridiculously low speeds. So because this entire concept runs on the main processor and uses main memory, it is wildly more capable than this thing. This comes with some risk, but it also allows you to place arbitrary things inside of the secure realm. So if you want biometric access, like face scanning, but you don't want to expose the face data that you collect to anyone, you can shove that into the secure realm very, very carefully. And build what's called a trusted application. So it's a limited API, limited job to do, and it makes a very clear boundary between the application and the secure realm. Now, I've done a lot of reading on ARM TrustZone, a bunch of research, and I have client engagements where ARM TrustZone will come into play, but I haven't had a chance to play with it for real yet and really tear into it. So we'll leave TrustZone aside for the moment, but I would say that's what you should look at for sort of future-proofing a device and implementing the full shebang of security features if it's available. Now, unfortunately, our situation when working in security and in hardware is rarely, if ever, ideal. So let's say your company started working on an affordable, highly scalable, well-known, and widely loved piece of hardware, like the Raspberry Pi. Does the Raspberry Pi Compute Module 4 or 5 have ARM TrustZone? Show of hands if you think it has TrustZone. It totally does. It's in the spec, it's in ARM's designs, but there's a quirk there. There's nothing in TrustZone. So there's no key storage, there's no volatile storage, no fancy encrypted memory. It doesn't do anything. So you can implement TrustZone on a Raspberry Pi for a few reasons. I'd say mainly research and experimentation. But also it does provide some isolation of runtime. It does offer some extra hardening features, memory randomization and stuff, but it's not useful as a root of trust. Now the Raspberry Pi does have security features or capabilities. It allows locking some values in a one-time programmable piece of storage, so you can get secure boot. So primarily you lock in a certificate for signing the bootloader initial boot code, and generally you'd launch an init ramfs from that and go on to get your proper Linux up. Now there is also some documentation that encourages you shoving a secret key into that OTP, so you can do disk encryption. And secure boot would make extracting that key kind of hard. But it's unclear how well protected that storage mechanism is, which is annoying. But like, there's not a lot of detail. I haven't seen anyone attack it yet. But so the Pi does have some security capabilities, but is not really TrustZone. Now this is where the little security chip comes in. The general term, hardware security module, or HSM. And some people use them to perform cryptography for weaker microcontroller devices, because it's faster than a microcontroller at that math. But I work with Linux level devices typically. So I care about the secure storage and those features, because my processor can run cryptographic algorithms all day just fine. The device is cheap, especially at scale, and it provides a unique identity for every device. And there are similar variants from a bunch of other vendors, and they all have slightly different interfaces, slightly different feature sets, which will make it all quite painful to deal with. You have to do work for each one. But a fun part of working with this device is that when you configure it, you lock the configuration permanently. So I have at least a dozen chips that I misconfigured in one way or another. I have a small baggie of them. Some of them work, some of them do a kind of job, but not the job I wanted. So, yeah, permanently burning things into hardware is fun. Some might bring up TPMs, the Trusted Platform Module. It is a standard, which is nice. Nice that it is a standard. I'm not convinced that it is a nice standard, because standards very rarely are. It is way more complex than I have any need for, which is typical of big standards. And you learn a frankly ridiculous number of acronyms as you try to make heads or tails of how TPMs work. And it seems to lead to fairly expensive parts in the cases I've looked at, which is unfortunate. But they are an option. They do this stuff any secure element should. And they have a bunch of features around measuring and unlocking secrets based on taking measurements. They're most famous for being required to install Windows 11. Who has heard about TPMs as part of trying to go to Windows 11? Oh, that's more than I've heard of ARM TrustZone. Yeah, that's a marketing move of a sort. Now people know about TPMs. PC enthusiasts know about TPMs. You don't want PC enthusiasts to know about anything. They're generally pretty cranky. But it is what it is. Now, this thing is called the ATEC 608. It's a simple chip, and in a typical configuration, it does the private key and MTLS stuff. It can do AES, and it can store secrets. And it has some useful mitigations. For example, it is well protected against voltage glitching, which is a common technique to make chips do things they aren't supposed to, such as give up their keys. But it is starting to show its age a little bit. Both it's kind of slow, and it's been broken. Or I should say broken, which is the same word, but with quotation marks. It's been formally defeated. Secure behavior has been subverted. The keys have been extracted. All that bad stuff. Some would say it's thoroughly broken and like straight trash and you shouldn't touch it. But let's look at the attack. The attack, quite advanced. They used very fancy equipment in a lab setting. And that was first for the old model, the ATAC 508. You needed one precise laser for single laser fault injection. So you flip the right bit at the right moment using a laser, and the chip does the insecure thing instead of the secure thing, such as letting you read the keys. So both while preparing the chip for this attack, which includes cutting off the top layer, and when probing the chip, and finally when blasting the chip, there's a significant risk of destroying it permanently, which makes the data unrecoverable. Now we have to applaud the awesome effort of pulling off what is an absolutely legendary attack. This is feasible in the realm of like advanced threats and state actors and that kind of stuff. It's not typical for someone pulling a thing off their wall and just experimenting on it. But it costs, I think it was a big cost for the revision. So the ATAC 608 has additional security, which means it needs additional lasers. So this time we have multiple laser fault injection. Just add more lasers. Each laser defeats one protection. It works out. They needed 4, I think. The same group did manage to make a consistent attack on that as well. It was complex enough that when tested on real secured hardware, they managed to extract secrets from 1 in 3 devices. The other 2 devices were destroyed. Now, their use of these chips were for Bitcoin wallets, and this might be one of the few contributions from the cryptocurrency space that I care about. Them hardening their wallets means all of us get better chips. And apparently people really care about hardening crypto wallets, which kind of makes sense. It's a money thing. But it's a very solid use of security research for marketing purposes. I think the firm that makes this wallet has a very good reputation from all this. So if you're interested in hardware, electronics, and security, I strongly recommend these 2 talks where Olivier Rivaud, I believe is the name, presents the work across a couple of different conferences. Now, in my book, this does not quite disqualify the chip from being used in consumer hardware, because honestly, I'd rate it okay for many more serious uses as well, commercial and so on. You have to consider your threat model. Can they get the device to a lab quick enough that the information is useful? Each chip is unique, so unless you made very poor choices, compromising one device should not compromise any others. So it comes down to what information you're protecting and why. We still have the issue that our device and the chip are essentially separate islands of security, and depending on that makes them a lot easier to attack fundamentally. So this is where you have to configure it for your security needs. If you want to be a little bit more hardened than the average, if you want to make Olivier power up the laser, then you need to lock down the keys so it will not be usable without the right device. So I can't just pull the chip, I need the entire device. So say our thing is a simple encrypted chat. So our device is a chat device that keeps the chat history on an encrypted file system. That's symmetric encryption, we need a secret to use it. And the device is small, so someone could just walk off with it, grab it out of your bag and run off with it. And in a basic configuration, this chip is naive. It would politely help the device do MTLS and connect to other things. And it could even just start up and share your secrets. And attackers have a bunch of options before they have to go to the laser laboratory. So they can read the eMMC or SD card. This won't do much damage if the data store is encrypted, but it will get them the encrypted data and the firmware, which helps just do the attacking. And inspecting the extracted firmware can tell them the procedure you use for deriving the secret keys, which is not typically a vulnerability. If you've done it well, it might be fine. But you can also harden against this by encrypting your firmware so that they can't get even that information. But that would require an appropriate key. And you can replace the firmware with a basic Linux setup as part of the attack and just interrogate the security chip in peace without all this secure boot stuff. So this is prevented by locking down the bootloader to only boot signed firmware, but you could still separate them. So if someone grabs the security chip, plops it down on another board and starts interrogating it, the best way to mitigate that would be to entangle the information required for generating the secrets with information from this lockdown secure boot device. So essentially you're trying to bond the security chip to the SoC. This is most easily done if you can store a secret key in the SoC. And there's also a bunch of ways you can electrically eavesdrop the conversation between the device and the security chip to get whatever the chip is spitting out across these wires. So part of preventing this would again require a shared secret between the chip and the processor so they can essentially act as one device. Or you can do a little bit of lateral thinking and do some physical security. There are more ways than highly engineered EEPROM to store secrets. Another way is to store them in volatile storage. So don't write your secret down, keep it in your head, or roughly analog to that. So the device supports a few mechanisms for using what's called the persistent latch. And by persistent, they mean that once it is set for as long as the chip has power. If power is cut, the latch unsets. It flips that single bit. And that single bit can be configured to inform the chip to completely stop operating in various ways. So in my case, both the device certificate for MTLS and the AES key I use to provide disk encryption secrets are made completely unavailable if the latch is flipped. So when our attacker rips the device off of power to take it home and tear into it, suddenly it can't show your messages anymore. I don't know if you know the reference, but you didn't say the magic word, Some people. So the magic word in question is not in the device. It hasn't been for a long time. It was just used to set the bit and flip the latch. And the configuration should ensure that the attacker needs to talk to Olivier and his lasers to get at the secrets within. Now these chips sip power, so it could run off of a coin cell battery for years. And I actually had to rip a capacitor off of this breakout board for the demo because it would keep this alive way longer than desirable. I don't think Adafruit, who designed this particular breakout board, have any idea how intricately these chips can be set up. At least something tells me they didn't use this feature. So this is what I had to do to the chip. That, for those who don't know, is a heat gun. So we desolder the capacitor, and then it behaves more like we want to. It goes from maybe forgetting in 30 seconds, maybe a couple of minutes, to forgetting in less than a second usually. So maybe the device is plugged in and the cord is pulled, the chip powers off. Or maybe the coin cell connection breaks if you open the case to get at the insides. Regardless of how you ensure it, if you can break power to the chip, you can lock the attacker out, keeping your secrets safe. Now, I work particularly with a high-level embedded Linux framework called Nerves, and within the Elixir language ecosystem. And we've used these chips for a number of years under the moniker Nerves Key. And it was in these last few months that I got this scheme set up and working as part of some client work, also for fun. And I use it to derive secrets and make it turn into a pumpkin if it loses power. And if you think this is interesting, if you want to play around with this type of stuff, you can just use it. It's all open source. There's even a complete firmware update service that goes along with Nerves called Nerves Hub. It's all open source. You can go to nervesproject.org, get up and running, or you can go to nervescloud.com if you want to try the hosted version of the update services. It's free for hobbyists. And you can do a lot with just this little cheap chip. I really want to explore more of what we can do to kind of lock down devices by default and have a good base security level if we can use all of ARM TrustZone, but that'll have to be a future talk because my clients haven't paid me to do that work yet. So I want to finish this off properly and cover some of the software security that takes the solution onwards from the hardware, because if you try to do it all from the hardware, it gets very expensive. So the hardware security features are foundational to establish the root of trust, but we don't have to limit ourselves to those. So when we have this foundation, when we have a cert locked for secure boot, we can verify that the first piece of code provided was signed by the trusted party. And with that trusted code, we can have keys and a hash tree for efficiently verifying the rest of the root file system. I've done this using a Linux kernel mechanism called dm-verity. DM stands for device mapper. It produces a disk device that you can mount, and verity stands for truth, I think. And in this case, it takes a disk partition, a root hash, a hash tree, and produces a new mapped device that can be mounted. It checks signatures and disk integrity at the block level as you use the disk, so an untrusted or corrupt sector is turned into an unreadable sector. So this transitions the trust from the hardware into the application and software realm. For disk encryption, we use the secret we obtained, and we use dm-crypt, which is similarly a device mapper, to take an encrypted partition and produce a partition you can mount and then read and write from. And it handles the block level encryption and decryption transparently. Nicely enough, the tools we use to deploy and update devices with Nerves already have great support for disk encryption, and they don't really touch the signing of the disk, though we can hook into the build process to do signing. And Nerves uses a tool called FWUp, which is quite nice, and it's a potential replacement if you don't like swapdate, RAUC, or RDFM. Or if you're straight up using a Linux package manager for embedded devices, in which case please talk to me after this. I have concerns about your well-being and your maintenance process. But currently Nerves Hub supports FWUp, and we're looking at adding support for more delivery mechanisms. We're not that particular. So we want to be able to update Android, Yocto, Buildroot, Debians. So whatever you're using, feel free to come talk to me if you're doing embedded Linux stuff or Android and are interested in talking over-the-air updates and firmware. Oh. I was doing so well at not skipping my own videos. So I hope I've given you some idea about both how ridiculously hard we can make it to break into a modern Linux device, but also just how sophisticated you can expect attackers to be. And if you have questions, I'll be around for the rest of the conference. Don't hesitate to come up and talk to me. You can find me via my website, underjord.io. And if you want a great embedded Linux framework, take a look at Nerves. If you need secure, efficient, and thoughtful device updates for your IoT fleet, talk to me about Nerves Hub and Nerves Cloud, because that's where a lot of my experimentation and learnings end up. All right, thank you all for listening.